Well, most of us in life, we really don't like change very much. It's disturbing to us when things change. And it's something that a lot of us tend to struggle with. And my own story of this is that years back, when I was an associate pastor and I was helping with leading worship in a couple of worship services at the church where I was, we had contemporary worship at 9:30 and then also at 11 o'clock. And while we were having contemporary worship, there was traditional worship going on at the very same time in a different building. And I had helped to start that worship service with some other people, and so I had a lot of investment in it, and it was something that I really enjoyed watching grow as it grew. And we had gotten to the place where we had about 150 coming at the 9:30 hour, and we had about 100 coming at the 11 o'clock hour. And I was slotted to become the new preacher of those services. The person who was preaching was about to leave the church, and I was to come in. And he was leaving to go start a new church. But the church that he was going to start was a church that was only like 10 miles away from where we were. And he had permission to recruit people to go with him from our church to go start that new church. And I knew that he was not going to be recruiting people from the traditional services. I mean, to go start a new church that was all contemporary, he would be starting it by bringing people from the services that I was preaching or about to preach. And so I was pretty kind of wound up about this, pretty anxious, because what I knew was that the day that I stepped in to preach, that would be the day that or what I imagined was that would be the day that everybody would remember as the day it all went downhill. Because that would be the day like hundreds of people would go off to start this new church with this preacher that they knew and they loved and they wanted to go be with, and I would be there with just a few other people. And so I was really very fearful of this happening, and I was kind of against it, and I actually maybe even tried to talk some people out of going with him. And it was really because I was fearful of change. I didn't want the change that was going to happen. I didn't want it to affect me. And I was fearful of how it would impact me and everything that I was doing. And so I really feared that change. I mean, that's not the only change that I have felt fear about in my life, but it is definitely one of the big ones for me. And I'm sure that for many of us in this room, we can think of things in our life that where change was about to happen, and it was scary. And I mean, a change of a job or moving from one house to another house or moving from one city to another city, those are big changes that are scary. And what people tell us is that really behind this fear of change, the reason why the fear of change is such a powerful fear is that it's actually that's not really what scares us, because most change is really about new good things. And I mean, it's kind of silly to be fearful of new and good things. But what's behind the fear of change is a fear of loss. And what we really fear when we fear change is not really the things that are going to be good that happen. It's the things that we will lose in the process. And so, and this fear of loss is one of the most powerful fears that's operative in our life. And so what we really fear is if we're about to have a job change, what we really fear is not the change, but it's the losing of what is familiar in the job that we have. If we're going to lose a relationship in our life, it's not the maybe because that might be a good thing for us, but it's not the getting away from that toxic thing, but it's the fear of losing what we know to be, we know how it is. Even though it may not be great, we know what to expect. And so that fear of loss is really what causes us to be fearful of change. And this fear of loss is something that is operative throughout our whole life. I mean, little kids will experience this, and people at the end of life will experience this. And the fear of loss that is probably the most powerful is the fear of losing life. I mean, that's the one that really is the most powerful. It's the fear of losing life, the fear of losing somebody that we love to death is probably the scariest possible thing. I mean, thinking about losing my parents terrifies me. I don't even like to think about it. I know it's going to happen, but I don't want to think about it. The fear of losing my kids, I don't even like to say those words. I just can't even go there. But the truth is, there's not a single person that you know or have ever known that will get out of this life alive. I mean, every single one of us in this room, the person sitting on your left and the person sitting on your right, every single person in here is going to die. It is a fact. Every single human being will die, and it terrifies us. And anything that looks like a losing of life is difficult. I mean, tomorrow is my 44th birthday. Don't applaud or sing, because I'm not happy. Because what I'm realizing is that I am like 44% less able to see than I used to be. And when I used to be able to flex and bend, now I go like that and I break, and I don't like this, because I know that 44 is that much closer to the end of my life, and the fear of losing life it's a terribly powerful fear. And Jesus knows this about us. Jesus knows how the fear of loss, how he knows what a powerful force that can be. He says in the Gospel of John, he's talking with his disciples. It is the night before he knows he's going to die. He knows that the next day is going to be his last day. And so he's gathered up with them, and he's talking with them about things that he wants to say before he dies. He knows that the heart, what has been stirred up in the hearts of the leaders, religious and political leaders in Jerusalem. He knows how fearful they are of the change that he represents. He knows that they don't like the kind of message that he's been preaching because it threatens them. And he knows that their motives are all centering on getting rid of him. And so he's gathered up with his closest friends, and he's telling them some things that he wants them to hear. And he says to them, while he's with them like that, he says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not let them be afraid. Do not let your hearts be troubled." He says, yes, I am going to be going away. I am not going to be around for much longer. There is coming a time very soon, and you will not see me. But do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not let them be afraid. He tells them later on in chapter 16, he says, I tell you, you will weep and mourn. You're going to weep and you're going to mourn. And while you're weeping and mourning, the world around you is going to be rejoicing, because the world, meaning the political and religious leaders, they're going to be rejoicing because I'm gone, even while you are mourning. And you will have pain, because it is painful to lose somebody that you love. But your pain will turn into joy. He compares it to birth. He says, when a woman is in labor, she has pain because her hour has come. But when her child is born, she no longer remembers the anguish because of the joy of having brought a human being into the world. So he's telling them, yeah, you're going to lose me, and then in a little while you're going to be in a lot of pain, and you're going to be mourning. But that mourning is going to turn into joy. And how could he tell them that their pain and their mourning would turn into joy? How is that even possible? Well, what he knows is that he will be crucified, and he will die a painful death, and they will be in pain as they watch this happen. Many of them will flee because they can't even stand to watch. But what he knows is that 3 days later, he will rise from the dead. And in rising from the dead, he will break the power of sin and death. When he rises from the dead, what that signals is that the entire universe has changed in a mighty powerful way, because now the power of death is no more. When Jesus rises from the dead, the power of death is gone. It's canceled out. And that gives us pause for joy. And so he says to them, do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not let them be afraid. You and I, even though we fear losing life and we fear the change and we fear all of these things, the good news is that we don't actually need to be afraid because the power of death has been canceled out. It no longer has a grip on us. And it gets even better than that. It gets even better than that because what he tells us is that he is sending the Holy Spirit. And he says the Holy Spirit will come. He says, the advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you everything and remind you of all that I have said to you. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give as the world gives. What he tells us is that not only will your mourning and your pain turn into joy, but you will receive the Holy Spirit. The very presence of Christ will be with you and will come and live inside of you. We believe that when we are baptized, that the Holy Spirit comes and takes residence within us, that the very power of God comes inside of us. There is a supernatural event that occurs when we accept Christ into our hearts. When we are baptized, the Holy Spirit comes, and we no longer have to walk through this life alone. We no longer have to walk through this life in fear because the very presence of God is with us. And that presence of God is with us every single day, at every single moment. We forget it all the time, but it's there. And if we will call on the Holy Spirit's presence, the Holy Spirit will walk with us and will guide us and will teach us and remind us of everything that Jesus taught us. And the Holy Spirit, in the presence of God, it is not something that we have to wait until we die to experience. It is something we begin to experience now, and we get to experience eternally. And the power of the Holy Spirit in our lives is why we have nothing to fear. When I was that associate pastor who was so fearful of the change that was going to take place in my church, and I was so fearful of losing all of these people and losing a part of myself, these worship services that I had built up, I was so fearful. And the day came when Matt was about to leave, and he was taking. It turned out he was only taking about 30 or 40 people, but that's a pretty good chunk of people. I mean, that's a pretty good chunk. Anyway, the day came, and I knew that they were going to be leaving, and I remember driving into the church that morning. I was so fearful of it was my first day to preach, like every Sunday from then on. And I was driving into the church, and I got to the church, and there was this little place where I would go and hide, and I was hiding out in there and praying and trembling and fearful. And I went down, and I got into the worship area, and I expected that it would just be like half full. Everybody was going to be at this new church. But guess what? The place was full. And the next service, it was full. And every Sunday after that, the service just grew and grew and grew. I don't know how God did it, but he pulled it off. Those 40 people were replaced by scabs or something. I don't know. The place was filled up with people. And it was incredible. But what I know is that if the place had been half empty or had been completely empty, it would have been okay because the Holy Spirit was living inside of me. The Holy Spirit was going to walk with me. And the Holy Spirit is walking with you. If life goes great, if life does not go great, you're going to be okay. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not be afraid. If everything starts to look lousy, it doesn't mean that God has left. It means he's just going to walk with you through lousy. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not let them be afraid. Amen.